Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. Left of the box. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box. Bonjour, bienvenue. I'm Sandy. One of the main reasons why I started this YouTube channel, Left of the Box, is because I felt like there was a certain voice not being represented on political topics, and that is for people who live with disabilities. There are many reasons why people living with disabilities can't get themselves out there as much. Sometimes it's directly tied to their disability preventing them or putting a lot of barriers in their way. And also a lot of the time it has to do with people who live with disabilities have a higher probability of living with poverty. Something as simple as an internet connection can be out of reach for them. This is why you don't see many people in office with visible disabilities. There's Sarah Jama, provincially. She sits as an independent in Hamilton, and she has a visible disability. She uses a wheelchair for mobility. Other than that, provincially, federally, I can't think of a single politician with a visible disability. It doesn't mean there aren't any. I just don't know of any. And there's probably many politicians with disabilities you can't see, mental health related ones. And part of the reason why you don't see people with disabilities in office is, again, a lot of us live with poverty, and it takes money to run a campaign, to run for office, for some people to take time off of whatever they're doing, to go out and campaign, or just sometimes physically campaigning can be difficult if you're living with a disability. If you have disabilities related to interacting with people, it becomes extremely difficult to get out there and become a politician. So that's why I appreciate Mike Morrice so much. He is the Green MP for Kitchener Centre, and he speaks to the issues people with disabilities face all the time in Parliament. And it's so important to have that voice in Parliament, otherwise we would be invisible there, as well as for a lot of us, our everyday life. I've brought Mike Morrice onto my show before to talk about the upcoming Canadian Disability Benefit, and I have brought him back on my show to talk about how it passed and how disappointing it was. And it got worse. It got a lot worse. It's worse than when they first announced it. Yeah. But it's so important that people know what's happening so that you can hopefully get involved and help make a difference for all of the people living with disabilities. So without further delay, my interview with Green MP for Kitchener Centre, Mike Morrice. I'd like to welcome back to Left of the Box, Kitchener Centre MP Mike Morrice, one of the brave politicians to come on to my show, not once, but twice.
I really appreciate the chance to be back again. These conversations are so important, so thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so what I wanted to talk to you today about was the Canada Disability Benefit, or lack thereof. It's something that Canadians have been fighting for quite literally years. I think it kind of started with CERB. CERB came out, the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, back when the pandemic started, and the government's like, you know what, bare minimum people need to survive. It's $2,000 a month. And for all the people living on disability, we're like, yeah, we could have told you that. And people on disability did not actually qualify for CERB. So a lot of people seem to think that it was just doled out to everyone, but people on disability didn't get that. So we were still forced to live on about half of that during the pandemic. And I think that's when the original kind of push for some sort of benefit for people with disabilities was to come into place. And part of the frustration was CERB took about a month to get pushed through Parliament. But the disability benefit has taken years. And then it finally comes out, and after all the consultation and everything, it was very lackluster. But one of the things that really got to me was a video that you posted on your Twitter feed. And I have a video about it, but I'll show it again for the audience.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the powerful advocacy of people with disabilities across the country, every MP in this House supported legislation meant to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. 9 months later, still no commitment from this government to fund what will be called the Canada Disability Benefit. When it came to MAID legislation, this government sure moved fast to make sure people with disabilities could die well. Will the Prime Minister show he's ready to ensure Canadians with disabilities live well by committing to a fully funded benefit by budget 2024.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member is better than that question that he just asked.
There, see, they just saw it. Where you were talking about how fast MAID, so that's medical assistance in dying, got pushed through, yet people on disabilities were still waiting for this benefit. And the way they responded to that made my blood boil. The way they jeered at you for, how dare you say that, when I'm somebody living with disabilities. I know tons of people who are. This is a real thing. You know, we are really contemplating what it means when our government makes assisted dying more accessible than accessible living. And just the way that they treated that comment just totally dismissed everything that we were. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you were fighting so hard for the Canadian Disability Benefit?
Yeah, well, thanks for all that context, Sandy. I'm fighting for it because it matters to folks in our community. Anyone who cares about reducing poverty in our community and across the country should be fighting for the Canada Disability Benefit, because it's folks with disabilities who are disproportionately living in poverty. 40% of those living in poverty are people with disabilities. And while it has been more difficult to build support for eradicating poverty altogether in this country, what I have found cross-party support in is at least doing so and getting, eliminating poverty when it comes to folks with disabilities and ending legislated poverty for people with disabilities. And so when I was elected, I was trying to find this mix between what is most important to people in Kitchener and where could we see progress on those. And to your point, this was actually a commitment that the federal government made in a throne speech back before the last election. They then reiterated it. It was in the Liberal Party platform, said that they would come forward with a Canada Disability Benefit. And for those who are curious to know more, this would be a benefit that would stack on top of existing provincial and territorial programs. So for those of us in Ontario, for example, people with disabilities are living in legislated poverty with support from the Ontario Disability Support Program. I say legislated poverty because that is a legislated amount that is below the poverty line. It's about $1,300 a month for a single person with a shelter allowance that is lower than almost every single apartment in Kitchener, I can say. And so the idea was meant to be to stack a federal benefit to be called the Canada Disability Benefit, such that the total amount, if you add the ODSP amount and the new CDB amount, it should bring folks at least above the poverty line. Mm-hmm. That was reiterated by the minister in the House of Commons when she said this would be a generational, transformational. The numbers they cited at that time were hundreds of thousands of people that would be lifted out of poverty through this benefit. So again, to answer your question, for me, this was really just about trying to make progress on something that we can all agree on, that folks with disabilities shouldn't be living in poverty in our community. And if you care about reducing poverty, you should be pushing for the Canada Disability Benefit. And it's why I have for the last number of years. And really just try to amplify the voices of the disability community. Because I think as an elected person, elected folks should be thinking about whose voices aren't being heard. And it should be incumbent on elected people to bring forward those voices. More often than not, I think it's the opposite. It's various lobbyists whose voices get amplified. I've tried to stay focused on making sure it's those who don't get hurt. And certainly the disability community has been underrepresented for a long time. And so my hope since being elected has been to bring the words, the calls, the stories, the lived experience of people with disabilities, to bring that to the floor of the House of Commons and to our advocacy for a fully funded, adequate Canada Disability Benefit.
So back in April, the announcement we had all been waiting for.
Yeah.
Let's just say I didn't have my hopes up because I've had too many runs in with this government I'm too aware. When they were first talking about it, I knew there was a good chance that somebody like me would not qualify for the benefit to begin with, because there's the disability tax credit, which is on a federal level for people who qualify for that. And then the announcement came out, and the first number you hear is $2,400. And I'm thinking, wow, that would actually be great, until you find out that it's not per month they're talking about. They're talking about the year. So it only works out to about $200 a month if you qualify, which works out to $6.66. So on top of that, let's say I were to qualify, on top of my $1,300 a month, I would get another $200, which is $1,500, which is still just the cost of a one-bedroom apartment at market rent in this area. Let alone the increased costs in groceries, the failing medical systems we have, which means more out-of-pocket expenses for the most part. And it was just kind of devastating. But then to find out that, yes, unfortunately, I was right. It's only people who qualify for the disability tax credit. And I have here this article from the CBC saying Canada Disability Benefit won't lift hundreds of thousands out of poverty. New numbers confirm. So originally the government was bragging, saying this would lift 600,000 people out of poverty. And so it says in the article here, while 1.6 million Canadians with disabilities live below the poverty line, April's federal budget indicates only 600,000 would be eligible for the new benefit. The government's numbers showed that by 2028, the benefit will lift 25,000 working age persons with disabilities and 15,000 of their family members out of poverty each year. That's not 600,000.
Yeah, we don't even have those numbers because I asked for them from the minister at committee a number of months back. We were all just so deeply disappointed with what was announced. And Sandy, you mentioned earlier that they'd done all this consultation. One of my most frustrating points, and what I've heard from so many folks with disabilities, is that they put forward this idea that they needed more time to consult. And then yet what came out was nothing that the disability community had actually been asking for. And so at that meeting, I asked the minister for two pieces of information. I asked her to tell us specifically which folks with disabilities and organizations who serve people with disabilities, which of them asked for the benefit as they've announced it. And then secondly, to tell us exactly how many people would be lifted above the poverty line. Even the $200 a month to $6 a day you mentioned earlier, that's actually the maximum amount. We now know in the regulations that if someone makes over $23,000 a year, that there will be beginning to be reduced amounts. So that's a max threshold. And so we weren't surprised then when they came back and said it's about 25,000. Well, again, to the numbers you've shared already for listeners, if you're on ODSP and you add $200 to it, you're still below the poverty line. And so I think it's important in terms of accountability that the CBC and the Canadians have those numbers to then call out for better, for this government to fix the Canada Disability Benefit, if even to only meet the expectation that the government themselves set. Because as you shared earlier, so many times over so many years, trust has been broken by various levels of governments when it comes to promises to the disability community. And in my view, this was just an opportunity to start to track a different course. Again, to the points you made earlier, we know that governments can move quickly when they want to. When it came to things like CERB, they moved awfully fast. When they see a crisis, in my view, government can act. We have to believe in the power of government to help people in the reality of what we're facing in this country right now. And we do have examples where that's been the case. Far more needs to be done to get the CDB moving quickly enough and adequately enough to even meet the expectation that the government themselves set.
Yeah, because again, the frustration around medical assistance in dying was it didn't take that much to start adding on to it. So there was the tract 1, then tract 2. So tract 2 is anybody who's living with a disability, whose life has been deemed unbearable because of it, can now apply for medical assistance in dying. And earlier this year, they were going to expand it to include people whose sole condition was mental health related. But there was so much pushback that that's been moved to next year, probably when they're hoping it will slip in under the radar. And I've interviewed somebody on my channel who had severe back issues, and he was about to get kicked out of his apartment that he had lived in for years and years and years. And there was literally nowhere else he could go that his disability would cover. And so he was looking at the option of being out on the streets and dying a slow, long death, or taking part in MAID and dying peacefully at home. Now, since his story made the news, he got a lot of support from the public. In essence, he won the charity lottery. But so many people can't rely on that, because he said he didn't want to die. It's just, what options do you have? And so now we have people with all sorts of disabilities, with mental health problems, and instead of getting us the treatment, the help, the in-home care we need, suddenly MAID is now the option. How do we justify that as a, civilized country?
Well, I think we need to push our governments to move more quickly to expand better supports in the social safety net, the Canada Disability Benefit being a critical piece in that, expanded healthcare, expanded mental health supports. There is a lot to unpack when it comes to medical assistance in dying. There is, of course, a charter challenge around, and the courts have been involved in pushing the government when it comes to creating MAID and the program around it. But the point I made in the House that you referenced earlier is again that it's incumbent on governments to do more for people who are living on the margins, who are living in poverty, to expand our social safety net. And that should be the priority, to move more quickly on that. It's certainly a part of why Greens have pushed back on expanding medical assistance in dying for those for whom mental health is the primary concern. Ultimately, that's where the government could move more quickly. They could tomorrow announce an adequate Canada Disability Benefit. They could announce the funding required for it. They could announce that they're going to lean on provincial and territorial programs to expand the eligibility. If they felt that this was a crisis, as it is, they could move more quickly. And so to me, it's just about, I guess, celebrating all of the advocacy from the disability community that's gotten us to this point, and encouraging others to join in to put more pressure on MPs across the country and on the political parties that they are a part of to push for better. Because as the budget, as passed, it's completely insufficient and deeply disappointing.
So how is this process now actually rolled out? Because I was reading, it's not automatic, even for the people that to qualify? So the people whose income is low enough, they still have to apply?
That's what we just learned in the regulations that came out just a few weeks ago. Um, Frustrating to me because all through the process, that's one of the, in all that consultation I mentioned earlier, what folks with disabilities kept saying is that it needs to be barrier free. And as a result of that, MPs have a chance to amend legislation. And there is a bill that is kind of providing the framework for the Canada Disability Benefit. It's called the Canada Disability Benefit Act. And I was one of the MPs who was successful in securing amendments to that bill. And one of the changes we got was actually a requirement for the benefit to be barrier free. And so to now know that not only are they going to require someone to have the disability tax credit certificate, which is incredibly burdensome to get access to. It's an 18-page form, 16 pages. You need a doctor. The one you know, positive, I guess, in the budget is that they did announce some money to help pay for the doctors to fill out all those forms so that it's more likely that a person with a disability will get the form filled out. But now not only does someone have to qualify for the DTC, which is also actually not targeted to those with the lowest levels of income. I think it's around 10% or so of people who have the disability tax credit actually have incomes of $100,000 or more. So it's neither a particularly targeted approach, nor, in my view, is it a barrier-free approach. But then, as you mentioned, not only do you have to have that certificate, but now there's going to be another application to Service Canada for those who have that certificate to then qualify for the Canada Disability Benefit. And that sounds like another barrier, right? Quite unlike, the Canada carbon rebate, for example, that is automatically deposited for anyone who completes their taxes every year. That would be more barrier free. And so we just learned this. It's another example of what needs to be fixed, that this government isn't listening to the disability community, is putting up another barrier, or at least proposing it. This is in proposed regulations, and it's not a final decision. People can give input to these regulations up until, I think it's September 23rd is the closing date. And I'm sure, Sandy, you can share with folks the link to give their submissions to that. On my Instagram, I posted about it just a few weeks ago. So if folks find me at Morrice Mike earlier in July, you'll see a post. It should be a link in my bio still. But we need to make it easier for people to continue to push back against what's being proposed in the regulations. The benefit isn't even meant to even start until July of next year. All of this, though, could be changed by those in government, by the governing party. And that's, I guess, what we need to continue to put pressure on them to do, is to do better.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because even the $200, well, it still feels like, it's not much. It's enough to get extra groceries, to maybe get a transit pass so that they can get around more. It is something. And it's just so frustrating that we have people who are complaining about the new tax on, what is it? The highest income earners.
Oh, yeah, the capital gains inclusion change.
Yeah.
Yep.
So many people are whining about that, where it's like only capital gains over 400,000 even have to worry about that, which is a minuscule part of the population. And that will have no impact on their life. And meanwhile, people with disabilities, if our income was just increased to $2,000, $2,400 a month, that is literally life saving in so many instances. Like, it's life changing, it's life saving to just have that. And we don't hear about it because, it's the constant stress. Like somebody like me, constant stress that something's going to happen to my rental situation. Because the only reason why I can afford my apartment is a long-term rental contract. That certain increases have been locked in for over a decade. There is nowhere in this province I can afford market rent for a room. So it's that constant anxiety of where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And that added stress doesn't help to make people productive members of their community. And it's just so frustrating that we're constantly pushed off to the curb because we don't contribute the same way that people who contribute to corporations do. We don't make capitalist money the way that they would like.
Yeah, it's in my view, it's partly a demonstration of who has the megaphone in this country. When there was a change proposed to the capital gain inclusion rate, which will, actually, even with the change, on our income, we pay tax on 100% of that income. Folks who realize a capital gain from selling a cottage, for example, they only pay tax on 50% of that gain as it stands right now. And the change that was proposed actually continued the exemption, it just reduced the extent of the exemption. It's now proposing if you make more than $250,000 of a gain, the first $250,000, you still only pay 50% you pay tax on half of it. But for the amounts above 250,000, you'll now pay tax on 66% of it. And if you look at how many headlines across the country came out in national papers and media, and the amount of pressure that was applied on the federal government when it came to that change, and compare that to the amount of attention we got when it came to the deeply disappointing announcement of the Canada Disability Benefit, and you have a sense of who has power in this country. And it goes back to that point I made earlier, where it's something I've been trying to stay focused on, is making sure with the platform I have, with the parliamentary tools I have, to put that to work for those that aren't getting that same platform. And folks with disabilities, those who are living in poverty. When it comes to Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks, we know that it's not that some people have access to the media more so than others. Some people have a louder platform than others, and I think you bringing up that contrast is such an important one for us to reflect on, because what a night and day difference.
Mm-hmm. So, what else can people do at this point to apply pressure on the government? I know there's a couple petitions available right now. What are
Yep.
the best ways for people to get involved and get engaged with this?
I love the question. I think the best way, MPs, we're speaking right now in July, MPs are home in their communities all summer. And so it should be even easier to get their time. And so this is a really critical moment where, if enough pressure is felt by MPs across the country, across all parties, we could come back in the fall and see a new announcement for the fall economic statement. The government could come out with plans to fix the Canada Disability Benefit. And so this seems like a really ideal time for folks to reach out to their MPs, those that feel comfortable. It could be as simple as a phone call or an email, but even better would be requesting a meeting with your MP. You can figure out who that person is if you go to ourcommons.ca and type in your postal code. Your MP's face and name will pop up, and their email address will too. And certainly, in my view, that's how our democracy is at its best, is that folks like myself are accountable to their neighbors in the communities they represent. And a personal email saying, here's my postal code, I live in the riding, you are my MP, this is what I care about, I want you to fix the Canada Disability Benefit. You can use language that comes from groups who've been advocating across the country, Inclusion Canada, Disability Without Poverty. Heck, you could even use petition text. You can go online and find a recent petition of mine and just copy and paste text from that for some of the calls we've put forward. On my website, if you go to mikemorricemp.ca/fixthecdb, you'll find a page there with some of the calls that were in our last petition, for example. And so I think getting in touch with your MP, asking for a meeting with that person, finding friends who'd be willing to do the same. If MPs hear from dozens or even hundreds of people in their communities over the course of the coming months, they're going to show up back in Ottawa, and when they have a caucus meeting, it's going to be the thing that they bring up. And that's how we help shift the positions of both of every elected party. To me, folks with disabilities are being let down right now, and every MP needs to justify to the disability community what they have been doing to push for a fully funded, adequate Canada Disability benefit that would lift all folks with disabilities out of poverty. So, reaching out to your MP, I think, is really well timed in whatever way that you might feel most comfortable to do it.
Great. Well, I just want to say, as somebody who's living with disabilities who rarely ever gets, acknowledged at the federal level, thank you so, so much for what you're doing. It's seen, it's acknowledged by people living with disabilities. We all see the advocacy you're doing, and we wish it wasn't just on you. We wish that it was a wider case, that it wasn't just one voice really fighting for it at the federal level, but we appreciate it so, so much.
Thank you for saying that, Sandy. It's my view that every bit of progress we've seen so far, including the unanimous support for that piece of legislation I mentioned earlier, even if the progress has been insufficient, everything we've seen has been because of that advocacy from folks with disabilities in your community, in mine, and in others across the country. And so, to me, this is my job, is to be standing up for folks in my community, and it's the job of every MP across the country. And so I know there are others who've been championing in their caucuses, in their parties, and it's because of people like you who've got a platform, who've been using that platform to put attention on this issue, and regular folks across the country, whether it's people with disabilities or allies of theirs who've been doing the heavy work for years and years and years and have stayed at it through every petition and email and rally. It adds up. So thanks for what you've done to give a platform to this, and thanks for having me back on again.
Yeah. So the CDB is disappointing as is, but it's still a step forward, and it's not the end of the journey. We can still push for more. We can still, make sure that people living with disabilities have a good quality of life, and thanks in part to people like you. So thank you so much again for coming on. I'll have to get you on again sometime, and you'll be like the third time politician on my channel. Okay, to be fair, I think I've only had like one other American politician on my channel.
Well, as long as there's an invite
to
be back, I'd be happy to be back on, particularly knowing that you're here in Waterloo region. It's to me, it's particularly special. So really nice to chat again.
Great, thank you. This isn't the life I had hoped for. I had dreams and hopes and aspirations and, all the things that people think of when you're younger. Nobody chooses to have a disability. We do the best that we can with what we have. And sometimes the best we can do is very little. I struggle to do this channel a lot. My anxiety, my mental health. There are sometimes I just want to give up, because it is difficult to put myself out here and make myself vulnerable and speak to these issues, but it's so important that some of us with disabilities do, so that people can hear our side, hear our perspective from people who actually live the experience. I do this because I know so many people who live with disabilities that can't. And they all deserve a voice just as much as anyone else in office. I live with people thinking the stereotypes about people with disabilities and how it means that they think I'm lazy or that I don't have talent. It takes a lot of energy to fight and maintain my mental health issues on a daily basis. I wouldn't want to wish this on anyone. The amount of stress of never knowing if I'm going to have enough money to pay for my rent, to pay for groceries. all that constant stress makes it even more difficult for me to keep my head above water, which is part of the reason why a disability benefit that would keep us just to the poverty line is so important. We're not asking for luxuries. We just want to be at the poverty line. And I have talents. I'm an artist. I'm a very good artist, exceptional artist, you may say. But because my art doesn't make money for the right people, it's not valued. And the thing is that I shouldn't have to be extraordinary in some way to be deserving of a decent life. Nobody with disabilities should have to constantly prove to people why we matter, why we deserve to just have the very basics to get by. If we could just be at the poverty line, for many of us, that is life-changing and life-saving. And when you take away the stresses that we're constantly living with in dire poverty, then we're able to express ourselves better. We're able to just naturally give back to the community more. But we shouldn't have to be constantly justifying our existence to people. We didn't want this. And something I usually tell people who are interested in getting involved in activism or advocacy is, don't wait for it to be your problem. Most people will at some point live with a disability. We all age, which I should also mention when we go back to that article, it said that it would benefit working aged people with disabilities. That's because once you become a senior, a lot of the benefits that you might get provincially, you don't get anymore. You get a bigger check, but that bigger check has to cover everything. Whereas right now, a lot of people on disabilities, some of our medications are covered, some medical equipment is covered. It covers some dental and all this sort of stuff, which goes away once you get onto CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. Of course, now we have the dental care for some low-income seniors, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. It's important to always do what you can when you can. And right now, this channel is what I can do to bring attention to what people living with disabilities are going through, to get my voice out there, and hopefully allow other people with disabilities to be heard. And if you would like to help me continue this endeavor, you can do that by becoming a patron. And I know all YouTubers say this all the time, become a patron and all that sort of stuff. But really for me, when I say every little bit helps, I mean it. You know, it might just be a little to you, but it means a lot to me. Every little bit. Because that is just one less thing I have to worry about. So you can become a patron, or there's a link in the description box below as well for an Amazon wish list, which would help buy things for my studio, buy things for my art or my cats or just me. And that be one less thing I have to pick up at the grocery store. If you don't have money, just sharing my videos, liking my videos, telling other people about my channel, those are all ways that you can help without paying a single cent. Also, if you're Canadian, you can send an e-transfer to SandeeLovas@gmail.com to help with vet bills in particular. I have an elderly cat that means the world to me, and he's on medication that no disability plan will cover. Or if you're not Canadian and would still like to just do a one-time thing, I have a PayPal link in the description box below. And again, that really helps a lot when it comes to looking after my cat Frodo. Because, yeah, he's about 17 and he's been with me through so much and he means the world to me. But I hope someday that my tiny little channel can get big enough that we can start making a bigger impact, a bigger difference when it comes to legislative policies. That we can really let people know we deserve a decent life because we're human. And this country is more than capable of providing that. Right now, we just have governments that are choosing not to. But if we get more people like Mike Morrice into office, I'm sure that will change. You can find links to all of his stuff in the description box below as well. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Please check out the clips of the live streams I do. Check out my live streams. I don't have a regular set time for them, so just keep on tuning into my channel and you'll find them. Salut, à la prochaine. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.